Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Thursday night, January 26th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I was just thinking back here over the last week at some of the weather systems we've seen, and I just wanted to revisit some of the severe weather that did hit parts of our Gulf Coast. We now see that we're up to 25 reports of tornadoes that have stretched all the way from this part of Texas clear over to the Florida Panhandle. And again, it's just kind of, I'm thinking a lot about what this pattern has given us and what it might mean going forward with the upcoming weeks and months, because one of the big features we're going to have a discussion about at the end of this video has been the presence of this large subtropical ridge that's been down here. And that's going to be an important key for wind shear when it comes to severe thunderstorms. It's going to be important for understanding the moisture transport and then the contrast between that and the Arctic air that in the near term is coming out of Canada. So I'm going to get there here in just a few moments, but I wanted to show you, this is a great website here from the Storm Prediction Center that looks at their annual severe weather report summary. So you can overlay all of the reports. So this is what we've seen since the beginning of 2023. I believe the data on here, I know it says the 24th, but I think it goes up to the 23rd, because you'll notice if I go to tornadoes, we don't have the newest reports that just happened, those that you just saw here. But already we're off to a quick start here with severe weather. And again, putting all those all together here just kind of shows us where we are. Now, this new pattern we're about to settle into is quite interesting, because by the time we get through the next few days, we're going to once again be watching the very large subtropical ridge spinning like this. But by the time we get into this weekend, we're going to have air that really began life over in Siberia just racing down across the Canadian prairie and invading the northern plains of the United States all the way to parts of the Midwest and even parts of the South down here, like the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma. So if this is the pattern we're going into, I did want to show you the source region for some of this cold air here. So I used the high split model and ran some backward trajectories here. I just decided to pick Sioux Falls as my example town. And so this is looking at the 29th. Where did the air that will be here on the 29th come from? And it actually began life here in parts of Russia. This is cross-polar flow. It's coming through the Canadian prairie, and it's going to really dive down and knock these temperatures back in a big way. Now, in the near term, just to show you the differences globally over the next 10 days of what the temperatures are, what we've noticed is, as of late, very mild conditions for this time of year have moved into this part of Russia. We've displaced some of the very cold air that had been over in Siberia and China, and now we start to see the reflection of that displacement coming across North America for much of the next 10 days. Something else to take note of here, we still have more rain coming into Argentina. And I do want to show you that there will be some drier conditions in Buenos Aires, that's this province here, but overall no major heat stress coming in. So the drier weather not being matched up with heat. We're going to talk about that at the end of the video as well. Okay, right now in the near term, most of the action's in the northern plains. And what we've got here is winter storm warnings out for Montana, high wind warnings. We have high wind advisories into the Dakotas, and then winter storm watch here in parts of the Red River Valley, but just issued today, we do have a blizzard warning that's here for the northern part of the Red River Valley from Grand Forks north. So a lot of action coming in with these clipper systems that are going to roll through here. We're going to talk a lot about the flooding potential down across the south and the very cold air that'll be coming into the midsection of the country, because right now we actually have wind chill advisory out for parts of Colorado, last couple of counties here in the southwestern side of Nebraska and then this side of Kansas. Also, a couple things to mention here. We do have some lake effect with the system that's leaving New England, and on the back down here in Southern California, still dealing with some very, very strong winds coming through Southern California. So I'm just going to go in and show it to you real quick. This is the 18Z NAM from Thursday night, and we're going to pick this up about 6 p.m. and just play this forward. So snow squalls coming off the back of the previous system. Here's the frontal boundary to the south of this little clipper. It's actually, believe it or not, mild behind this, not really cold, but that one sweeps through. And then following it is the much, much deeper system that rolls out here into Montana. So this one's coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan, parts of western Saskatchewan, and it's really going to push a bunch of cold air, give us some upslope flow. So throughout much of the day on Friday, we're going to be talking about some snow in parts of Montana. We'll take a look at those accumulations in a few moments. As we go forward here, you're going to see that front kind of flattens out here, and a weak low begins to show up in parts of Nebraska. And on the northern side of it, we're going to be watching for more of that snow to come through. Now, you notice there's not a lot of rain to be discussed on the southern side of this. So we're kind of squeezing out what moisture there is with this contrast of two major pressure systems. They're both high pressure. So there's a 1040 high here. I know it's hard to see. And the extent of that is coming down like this. And over the southeast, there's a 1028 high. And in the middle, the low pressure's down to 1012. So what ends up happening is the flow is just kind of doing this. And, well, excuse me, let's try that again. It's coming around like this and like that. And we're going to squeeze right in the middle here and put some snow down in this particular area. So picking up with Saturday morning, playing through the rest of the day on Saturday, and getting out there into Sunday, we finally begin to see moisture coming up out of eastern Texas and Arkansas, Missouri, and Illinois. And we're going to talk a bit more about this in a moment, but you can see the risk of possibly some ice accumulations where we overrun that warm air with the Arctic air that's sliding in behind it. So that's what things are kind of shaping up like through Sunday, really Saturday night. Now, just to give you some ideas on the snow, this is just a quick look here at what's expected throughout parts of Montana. There'll be a very sharp line here where the snow amounts drop off to where most places north of this line are getting an inch. But you go south of it, we're getting some of the upslope flow effect, and those amounts start to really get pretty high, such as the mountains here might pick up 18 to 20 inches in certain spots. I also want to show you what this looks like in the central part of the United States. So let's kind of zip over there real quick. We can see that right in this very narrow band, okay, as that low kind of skirts between the two ridges, two high pressure ridges, we've got a spot in here that could pick up, according to the National Weather Service and the National Digital Forecast Database, maybe 3, 4, 5 inches of snow. But there'll be a swath into here that easily picks up, I think, 3 inches out of this. And I'm much more confident about that than I was about the snow that came into parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, where, again, we talked about this morning. That was a really quite a big bust in terms of predicting that snow. Okay, from here, let's go take a look at just the next 10 days. I want to stuff this kind of in the back of our heads as we think about this pattern, because we still do have some split flow in the west, although there is some indications it might take a break and become more zonal at about 10 days from now. But we have the clippers rolling through, and we're going to have abundant moisture kind of feeding around that subtropical high. So we're drier along the west coast. We're drier from parts of the central and high plains through the ice states, except for that little narrow corridor of snow. But getting over here into Ohio, Michigan, but to the south of that region, extremely wet conditions where we're going to be kind of lining up the squeeze between these two high pressure cells. All right, just thinking about this map, though, I want to put it in the context of some broader things before we dig into it. And we had a new drought monitor that was released today. And what we see here is we still have about 65% of the lower 48 in some form of drought, from abnormally dry all the way up to exceptional drought. And if we just take a look at how much the drought has changed, I'm going to compare, if you notice here, December 6th to January 24th, the newest drought monitor. So when I slide this, you're going to see the changes here in the drought extent. So again, this is December, and this is getting into the latest drought monitor. And the point here is just to kind of show where there's been some relief. And a lot of it has been in the Mid-South, Eastern Corn Belt, and in parts of the Southeast. And we've worked hard on the drought in the West. Take a look at California. This is December, and this is the newest. So there's been some great changes out West, but a lot more precip still needs to come into the West to really cure this issue. And just as a reminder as to what helped with this, I want to just point out some of the new pattern we're seeing here in the jet stream as a way to illustrate where this is going to go. Because from the 1st of this year to the 17th, the jet stream just started in Africa, went across the Middle East, came across Asia, and just continued. I mean, almost this unbroken line, no major ridges, no major troughs for, in some cases, over 20 days. And that's what brought the flow into the West. Well, since then, since the 17th, this is what it's done. It's retracted and split. And the flows come back together and raced here. So we're going to watch the evolution of this pattern as we go forward in this particular forecast. Now, over the last 7 days, that split has meant that the West Coast has seen much drier conditions. I mean, compared to normal, this is still dry for the West. We've actually seen not very much precip across the northern tier of the United States, even though there's snow on the ground here. And even back after that snow event that came out of Colorado into Kansas, and the one that came out of New Mexico into Texas, Oklahoma, there are still a few places in here that are showing up dry. But I want to show you what the snowpack looks like here, and then discuss why this region is going to continue to see major flood threat as the next several systems come through. So let's go and look at the satellite data as the sun set today. So let's pick this up here. There we go. And we can really see the snow, of course, because the clouds move and the snow does not. So, for example, some of the big snows we saw in Arkansas and into Missouri, they're melting pretty quickly. You can see that throughout the day today. Same thing for back in the Panhandle here. So that means that's moisture that is getting into the ground, but unfortunately it's not as though it was a tremendous amount of moisture for some parts of this. Now, certainly in parts of Arkansas it was. But you can also see the other bits of snowpack that are in throughout the rest of the plains and throughout the west. One thing that's very important to see, do you see this cloud field right here? This is deep. This is some cirrus clouds deep in the atmosphere. And over about 10 hours, it moves about 1,600 miles by my calculation. 10 hours, 1,600 miles, so that's about 160 miles an hour. So that just tells you how strong the flow is around this subtropical ridge. Now let's quickly just take a look at western snowpack because we've not added a lot to this lately, so we just want to get a good glimpse at the numbers here. We need a lot more in the Northwest, throughout the Northern Rockies. We're still doing really well on the upper Colorado Basin, getting into the lower Colorado River Basin, and of course the Sierra Nevada still doing quite well. But a lot more is needed kind of along the Front Range, and a lot more is needed, like I said, in the Northern Rockies and the Cascades, the Blue Mountains as well. So we need to see this pattern become more conducive to flow into that region. And there is some good news for this area coming up here in just a few moments. But I also wanted to show you the reservoirs right now. Just kind of take a moment, pause the video, and have a close look at this. But I often try to focus on a couple of the big ones, like Oroville and Shasta. Both of them right now are Shasta is just shy of its historical average. Oroville is over. But in terms of, close to being full pool, Shasta's not 55% and Oroville is at 63%. So just a good way to kind of keep track of this. Now, I've been trying to remake these maps and make them look better. I'm sorry if they're still a bit busy and ugly. But this is percent of normal snowfall since the beginning of this season. So they start this on September 30th. So I kind of overlay numbers to kind of show you where it is. So for example, right where I live in the Midwest, we're in a bit of a deficit here. Most places have them between 50 and 75, 80% of normal. Where that snow just went through, some places now in here are in that 200 to 500% range. Same thing for this part of Colorado into Nebraska and southern parts of South Dakota. You can still see big numbers out west, in some places almost 300% of normal snowpack. But there's a lot of holes in this, and there's a lot of folks saying, when are we going to get some of the snow? But I do want to make one comment about this snowpack. And I mentioned this morning in the morning report, but again, I want to show you the snow water equivalent map. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is, again, a lot of this has melted, but we want to know how much water is in this overall, because, and this is probably the most important thing. If you just look, so you notice we're in this 1 to maybe 3 inch range down here across much of the upper Midwest, in the northern plains and even parts of the central plains. So there's quite a bit of water in this. Same thing for New England. And of course, we just looked at the west. But what I'm watching is that instead of just going down 16 inches, I went down 40. And I want to show you what the deep soil moisture stuff or profile looks like here from NASA. Because all of this dryness you see here, this is all actually remnant of the September to late October massive drought on the Mississippi Basin. They're still unable to make up for that, partly because in some places the soil froze, so you can't put the water down there. But in other places, like even though there's been decent rains in the eastern Corn Belt and parts of the Great Lakes states and good snow, it's not yet been enough to fully penetrate down through the profile. And so this map here is very important going into spring. This one, it's kind of the signal we need to see change in order to continue to remove the risk of drought going forward, all right? Now, we come back to the forecast with that setup, and once again, what do we see? I'm going to try to paint those areas that are drier and then explain these couple of regions here that are going to be wetter. And to do that, let's go right up to the upper levels of the atmosphere. Now, if you don't mind, I want to play this fast for you, and then I'll slow it down. So as we just go forward, this is 10 days. What I'm watching for is after this week, there's a bit of a shift. Most of this next week, it's troughs here and then short waves that orbit it while there's broken flow, split flow in the Gulf of Alaska. But watch the trough that's anchored around the Hudson Bay. This is starting on Monday and getting through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week. It's displaced. It moves. And so therefore, there's going to be this temporary pattern shift that we're going to watch for. And this is also going to be a signal that that really cold air I started off this video talking about does kind of have an expiration date. It's not going to be around forever, and there's going to be better chances at getting some mild air in at times. But the model is unafraid to keep dropping big troughs through the Canadian prairie at times, keeping the pattern very active. So I'd like to use the European model for tonight's analysis. It's performing about 4% better than the GFS, and there's a feature in the European model I'd like to point out, okay? So we've already seen through Friday, getting into Saturday. So there's a little clipper I talked about after it put the snow down in Montana, Wyoming, parts of northern Idaho. And that clipper rolls through and opens up the Gulf. And again, you got the flow around one high like this and another high like this, and sandwiched in between is where we get this transition. Rain switching over to possibly freezing rain, and then snow on the backside. And that freezing rain is going to be an important component of our discussion going forward. So this is out there to Sunday morning at 6 a.m. As we play forward, you're going to notice early next week a lot of thunderstorm activity in the lower Mississippi River Valley, Gulf Coast, southeast, while a system rolls down through the west, delivering some snow, some moisture to California. But as we play this out from Monday into Tuesday, it's the depth of the cold air in this high pressure cell, see it right there, that could set up early next week the risk of ice accumulating in this area. The models have been all over the place on where this particular event's going to be, but let's just pick this up. Watch this again. This is now Monday afternoon, Monday evening, getting into Tuesday morning. And you're looking for these pinks and blacks. That represents where there's ice. Then another surge of upper level lift from the trough that's digging in here. And there we go, Tuesday into Tuesday midday and Tuesday evening. So you see that. Let's rock back and forth. This is Monday into Tuesday. It appears that parts of Texas and Oklahoma into Arkansas could get some ice out of this system. Now, as we play this forward into next Wednesday, there is yet another system, and this is the one where the European model stands out from the GFS. This system coming into Texas here, producing the snow in the Panhandle, the possibility of strong to severe storms east into the lower Mississippi River Valley. This is the system that is only right now being resolved well by the European model, and it even has some ensemble support for it. But why I'm watching it so carefully is it is delivering moisture to a place, I mean, this is why we started off with this, that has been so very, very dry. So we got to keep an eye on what that could possibly do out there about a week from now. This is next Thursday into Friday. All right. Now, from here, I just want to show you the probability of a few things. This is the chance of getting at least 3 inches of snow over the next 10 days. So you can see we have a clipper corridor here, one there and there. And then if we step this up to 6 inches, this kind of identifies those places that could see some really heavy snow. Sorry, it switched models on me here. Switched model run, excuse me. Let me go back to the 12Z and take you out again to that 10-day forecast. The 18Z and 6Z only go out 140 hours, so that's why we don't typically show those. But again, that's where we're seeing our biggest snows. There's some lake effect in this as well. Now, the other part of this is ice. And the European model 12Z is showing that the greatest potential for it, and it's been consistent for the last 3 runs, is right here with those systems next week into parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley. But with the first couple of fronts that dive through, there could be some ice accumulating in parts of the Central Corn Belt, the Ohio Valley, the parts of the Missouri Valley, the Mississippi. So we're going to watch this as well in this region. The GFS, though, if I could flip over to it real quick, is not showing the same locations. No, it's more over toward Tennessee, and it has a bigger stripe through parts of Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. So I'm just letting you know that next week we need to just watch the models hone in on where there could potentially be ice here. And you say, why? Cold air diving out of Canada, warm air around the subtropical ridge, it just sets up that sandwich that's needed to give you the ice. Now, total precipitation, let's come back to the story about the flooding in the south. As we play this forward through this weekend, here it's starting to open up. Ready? So from Saturday into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, already we're seeing the potential for some very heavy rains from eastern Texas all the way to the coastal Carolinas. And then remember, there's another system following. There it is, next Tuesday, Wednesday, and it goes right over the same area. So what we're seeing here is multiple chances of getting some very heavy rain, while just to the north of it, right in through here, quite dry. So this is the probability of getting at least an inch over the next 10 days. And if we zip this up to 2 inches, sorry, it did switch models on me again. The 18Z came in while I was recording this. Let's go back and find that one. There's the probability of getting 2 inches in the next 10 days, so quite high. From here, I just want to show you that by day 10, the jet stream, while still retracted, all right, notice how it's not extending all the way, does have better flow trying to come into the west coast right here. And as that occurs, the trough that's anchored over the Hudson Bay is going to try to move east and take the strong jet streak with it. And because of that, can you just notice how the strongest flow is on either side of North America, not necessarily over it? So what's happened here is that the week 2 precipitation pattern isn't really reflecting that strong flow. In other words, we see near normal to drier than normal conditions for a lot of the United States in the Canadian prairie. So the signal is gone for the active pattern, but it's not going to be gone for very long. And that's what I want to talk with you about. Because after we see this cold air plunge into the country, ready? There's Friday's high temperatures compared to normal, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So we've got 4 days of very cold air that's coming into the northern plains, down into the central plains, into the Midwest. The west is cold as well. But the subtropical ridge is keeping southern Texas through the lower Mississippi River Valley, even north of the mid-Atlantic, with mild air. And you can see it's going to be around all the way until Wednesday, while this area goes back into a pretty deep freeze where the high temperatures, that's what you're looking at here, are going to be struggling to get above 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But we ask, how long is that going to last? Because if the flow loses some momentum, that cold air comes in, but watch, this is now getting into the first 5 days of February. That's the first 5 days of February. The second 5 days, or day 5 through 10, all of a sudden sees much more mild air returning. February is going to be a month that's going to put us on a pretty wild ride with temperatures. Do not expect it to get stuck one way, unlike what most of January did. My support for that comes from this last bit of the analysis today before we talk quickly about South America. The European model, February 10th to March 10th, has gone back over and, I guess I should say, has maintained the risk of above average precipitation throughout this area. This is consistent with the CPC. It's consistent with the pattern as well. Now, the dryness you see in California could be overdone, except for the fact that what may be driving this pattern is currently what's going on in the tropics. So let's come back to this again in a second, but take a snapshot of this just looking here at, again, February 10th to March 10th. Right now, we're seeing very strong easterly wind bursts right here. So let's line this up on the map on the bottom. But no strong westerly winds coming out of the Indian Ocean. So that's pushed the MJO almost all the way over to here, which is sitting on top of MJO Phase 3. But over the coming 10 to 15 days, westerly wind bursts are expected to develop in the Indian Ocean, which is going to push the MJO from Phase 3 possibly through Phase 4, maybe 5, 6, 7. It could actually return back to the Pacific Ocean. And if you remember where I started this video, I know my videos are long. In fact, I hope you get a kick out of this. I had a guy tell me earlier this week when I was in Sioux Falls that my long-range forecast videos are kind of like the song by Iron Butterfly, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, it's a long song and it just keeps going on and on and on. And I said, well, do you like it? He goes, I listen to it every time. I'm like, okay, so I'll take that as a compliment. But anyways, just getting here and making a point of this, take a look. The MJO is right now in Phase 3, might briefly come into Phase 4, but there are some indications it might jump right back out here in the Western Pacific. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the video, what did I stress? How long are we going to deal with this subtropical ridge? And what I'm thinking here is that if we stay in Phase 3, it's there. But what if we pop over to like Phase 4 and 5? That subtropical ridge is still here, and there's one off the west coast. But there's flow coming in like this and has to zip over it. Phase 5 is an active pattern for February for precip, but not overly cold. But what if we end up here? This is what happens if it pops out in the Pacific Ocean. Still a subtropical ridge, which means there's a lot of reasons to think that the subtropical ridge is going to be a feature. But Phase 7 could really start to deliver those cold shots to the northern tier of the United States. So I say all of that to tell you that this would be the result of a big subtropical ridge spinning here, cranking the moisture into each one of these systems. But with a ridge hanging off the west coast of North America, it's hard to get the flow to come back into California, which means we could flatline a bit on precipitation in California. I would bet more on the downside for precipitation for California going into the month of February than the upside, which means we're going to have to start a discussion in February about what are the chances of a miracle March. One last thing about North America, and then we'll get on to South America. We are still watching a big split in the in the polar vortex. But there's no indications yet that this is going to link up with a big troposphere cold air outbreak at this point. In fact, it might, by the end of this month, find its way back to sitting right on top of the North Pole again. That's a real tough wild card to try to deal out and figure out what it's going to do. Okay, last thing I want to talk to you about, South America. This is a tool we've used in the past. It's looking at the Vegetation Health Index. It's a way of looking at drought area, and we're in Argentina. Now, you know we've been talking about all the rain that's coming to Argentina as of late. And what's happened in Buenos Aires, we've now seen the drought indicator really start to fall off. You see that? You can even bump this around. Let's go over toward Cordoba, and you'll see a very similar thing. It reached this huge peak. But since the rains have come in, we've now started to see some changes in the Vegetation Health Index. It's even showing up on some of the NDVI imagery. So if you look, these colors represent an improvement. As viewed from satellite, this would be getting worse. And compared to a week ago, you can now see that down here, we're starting to see some improvement in the Vegetation Health Index because of this recent rain. This is critical to what's going on in South America. And the reason for that is that so much of Brazil has had near ideal growing conditions. There's been some stresses in southern Brazil, but lately the rainfall is starting to come up, and it's going to continue to do so. I'll just play you out here a full week, and we'll stop it out there at 1 week, which is right about here. And we see, again, heavy rains from Mato Grosso into eastern and central Brazil. We saw the hole that was in Paraguay into southern Brazil fill in, and we see very heavy rains moving through parts of Argentina. And the models just want to continue to deliver that rain. One of the consequences of all this rain is that the crop has stayed greener longer. I was talking about this with several of my friends and colleagues today, and that's delaying some of the harvest progress that I expected to see be really fast. The crop just isn't finished yet because there's been plenty of water and it's not yet ready to dry down. We'll take a look at some of those new stats when we get the new data tomorrow, although I'll probably include it in my Monday report. But with that, I'm going to stop. I really appreciate it. Maybe you'll all go listen to a little Iron Butterfly next. But with that, I'll see you all very soon. We'll talk again in the morning. Thanks.